In this video, we're going to be adding the icon buttons, or the icon aspect to the buttons, which is maybe the most complicated aspect to this. And you may not love the exact approach that I take, which is totally fine. Maybe you want to take a more composable approach, but this is the one I'm going to take and just try to show you how you can use CVA to accomplish it. If you're a little confused at what I'm talking about or where we are, it's probably because you missed the last two videos. So go back and watch them and then be here. And then you'll be like, oh, I understand everything he's talking about. So we want to add these little icons here. If you notice, we have kind of these left icons, and then we have these right icons. So we have like a leading icon and a trailing icon. So that's how I want to approach it. I want you to only be able to have a leading icon or a trailing icon. So inside of the button, I'm actually going to not start with CVA. I'm going to start with the button props first this time. And I'm going to add, and we're going to say that you could have a trailing icon, and that will be an SVG element. Actually, it's going to be an SVG component. We'll make that in a second. It doesn't exist yet. Oh my goodness, something crazy is going on. So we got a trailing icon, right? It could be an SVG component. This is also a partial or an optional element, or prop rather. And so then you have a leading icon. So I did these in the wrong order. I would prefer leading to be first. And again, it's optional, and then it's also an SVG component. We have a bit of a problem, first of all, at least the way I want this component to work, is I don't want you to be able to have a leading and a trailing icon. I think that's a little bit goofy. I think it'd be weird to have like two icons. So this is where we get a little bit of TypeScript going on. We can use a discriminating union to make it to where you can only add one of these. So if we wrap this in parentheses, and then we say we had the little pipe, the or, essentially, the union, then we can just copy and paste the same thing. Get rid of that. So the difference though is we're going to say, okay, if there's a leading icon, then trailing icon has to be never. And if there's not a leading icon, rather, if there's a trailing icon, then the leading icon must be never. These are all still optional, so you could still add neither of them, but you can only add one of them. And so I'll show you that this is actually working, but this is basically how you make it to where you can only have one prop between two different props. So that's TypeScript helping us out. Like I said, let's add this SVG component. This is just React shenanigans here. So we're going to say React.component, I think type, yep. And then we're going to say SVG element. So pretty ridiculous, but that gives us our SVG component that we want. All right, so now let's pop it off, right? So we're going to say if we have leading icon, and we actually are going to rename this as capital leading icon. And the reason is because we're going to be able to pass it in as a lowercase, but then we're going to render it as JSX, and JSX has to start with a capital. So it's a little trick for being able to pass in a prop that is actually going to be rendered as JSX. So we can do leading icon and then trailing icon. And again, trailing with a capital T icon. So we have the two. And we're going to do a quick check here as well, because I'm not going to trust that everyone has TypeScript necessarily enabled, or maybe they're consuming this library and they don't have TypeScript. We're not going to totally just assume there's no pure JavaScript users here. So we're going to do a check env, which is the util that I created in this little repo. We're going to say if you're in development, then the callback is what will be called. And we're going to do a quick check of if there is a leading icon and there is a trailing icon. That's a no-no. So we're going to say console.warn, and we're going to say don't do that. Now we'll say something a little bit more useful. You should only have a leading icon or a trailing icon, not both. Cool. So that's just a quick check to make sure that in dev, if someone does throw both of them in there, then they'll be warned appropriately. We could make this maybe an actual error that we throw or whatever. You can just decide what the DX you want. Okay, so now we actually want to render these. So this part's pretty easy. So we say if you have a leading icon, then render it. Leading icon, otherwise null, and it's like the exact same thing for trailing, but on the other side of the children. So trailing icon. Okay, I'm realizing that we're getting some TypeScript errors, so again, I probably messed up here. Yep, so this should be react.svg attributes and then SVG element. Hopefully that's right. All right, it looks good to me. Let's go see if there are any specific class names or anything on these icons that we care about. So if we scroll down here, we can see we're using check circle icons. So that's what we'll pass in. And it does look like it comes with some class names. So negative ML, so margin left, 0.5. So it's going left a little bit. And then it has a height of 5, with a 5, not 5 pixels. But if you hover over it, you can see it's like 1.25 rim, 20 pixels. So that's the class name that we're going to want. That is specifically for the leading icon. For the trailing, it's the exact same, but it's MR, not ML. So we will go ahead and pass those both in to the class name. So this isn't specific to CVA. We're not going to use CVA to determine these just because this is so simple and there's no really variance here. If you did have variance of your icon, then maybe you would use an icon variance and you'd create that with CVA. So MR instead of ML. Great, that gives us the leading and the trailing icons. So let's start rendering these to make sure we are getting the styles correct. In this case, I'm not going to do all the different intents. I'm just going to do the sizes. So we'll map size, and then we'll say button wrapper per usual, key of size. And then here we want to map some like trailing icons. We want those first, and then we want the, or leading, and then we want the trailing. So again, I'm going to add a let's see, icon positions. Okay, so add that, and then here I'm just going to say, as const. I'm not going to try and pull out what those should be. This just in this case, it seems a little bit easier for me to say leading icon and then trailing icon, and not try and infer that, mostly because these weren't really in CVA. This is more of a specific prop from our component. So now we got our icon position. So in this case, where we have our button wrapper, we're going to map over this. And so we'll say the icon position. We will then pass it into our button. So let's take an example of the button that we have, and we'll throw it down here. Cool. I think we grabbed a little bit more than we wanted to. So like I said, the intent will be primary. I'll make that explicit. Primary, and then the size will be the size. And then here, we're not actually passing, or no, sorry, we can pass it. We can pass the leading icon, but how do we know what the position should be? So let's just figure that out really fast. So one way to do this is to say const, well, let me back up just a little bit. So what I want to ultimately pass in is I just want to pass in some icon props. And I'm going to determine those icon props by doing this first, just getting everything in the position I need it to. So we'll say const icon props, and then we'll say if the icon position is leading, then we're going to say, leading icon, and we'll say, I think, check circle icon. That's what we had pulled in. Yep, perfect. And then otherwise, it's going to be trailing icon as check circle icon. All right, so if you have your icon position as leading icon, it'll have a leading icon of check circle icon, and if it's the other one, which is trailing icon, it'll be a check circle icon for a trailing icon. And we can see that those all got passed in right. The styles, of course, look totally incorrect, so we'll fix that, but that was just a little bit of setup so we could see it. All right, so let's go down and just see what's going on with these icon buttons. What do they have that makes them so very special? The first thing we'll notice is that they have inline flex and item center. That's the way that they accomplish. They're nice, straight, like in a line. They have the SVG and they have the text by each other. And then they've got this gap. The gap changes. So I see a compound variant kind of coming in there. So let's just copy these first two because that's the things that we want to know. And then here, let's see, how's this variant going to work? So I didn't want to name it trailing icon or leading icon. I didn't want that to be a specific variant in here. I didn't want to do like icon, trailing, leading, or whatever. What I actually want to do is I really want to think about the content. I want to think about what is the content being passed into these components. And additionally, this isn't something I want to pass directly into the component itself. I kind of want the component to be smart enough to figure out what's passed to the CVA, the button variants that we created. So I'm going to use something that I'm calling, this is not really a CVA thing, but I'm going to call it like a private variant. And I'm just going to put an underscore in front of it so that that's signaling to me this is a private variant, and we're going to call it content. So again, that's nothing magical. That's just something I created as a indicator to myself that, hey, this thing should not show up in the actual component props themselves. And so we're going to have three types of content that can be passed. This is kind of how I want my buttons to work. I'm going to have, it can be text. It can be an icon, just an icon. That's this bottom example. And finally, it can be text and icon. So like I said, with the text and icon, it's going to be inline flex and item center. I don't need to do anything special for the text and icon, at least not yet, because there's nothing really special. It's just this text and icon situation. So how do I actually say that the content should be text and icon? Well, first, I do want my default. Just because I'm doing defaults for everything, I might as well do it here. So we'll do text for that one. And then with the content, we want to pass it into our button. So we have content underscore, like I said. First thing I want to notice is you could actually pull this off of, not that one, this one. You could pull this off of the props, which isn't good. Like I said, I don't actually want this coming in as a prop. So I'm going to go ahead and omit that from these button variants. Actually, I don't want to do it there. I want to do it up here. So underscore content. Perfect. Okay, that's not happy. Looks like I left that underscore content, so my bad. That should be happy. And now I shouldn't be able to pull content anymore. Yeah, it doesn't know what that is, but I do want to pass in this content like I was saying. And how am I going to determine what it is? Pretty simply, I'm just going to say if there's a leading icon or a trailing icon, then I want it to be icon and text and icon rather, because this button, you can't just have an icon. I'm actually going to create a separate component for that just because it's a little bit easier in my opinion. Otherwise, it's just going to be text, right? So if you have either of these, it's text and icon. Otherwise, it's just text, and that fixed it. That gives us the inline that we wanted. It does not finish everything because we do need the gap stuff different. So there's a little bit more to do. So we'll go ahead and do that. Before we do though, I'm realizing this is kind of in the wrong order. I did my sizes and my icon positions a little bit incorrectly. So we're gonna change that up. Oop, broke everything of course. So let's think about this. This should just be icon positions first, and then this should be icon position, and then these should be sizes, and this should be size. And this should be icon position, and then that key can be size, and then I think we're all happy. Okay, so we want to go add those gaps and whatnot. Scrolling down, what do we see? We can see that we have gap x 1.5 and then a gap x of 2 for everything else. So in my case, I'm going to say that the extra small and the small, they'll be the 1.5, and then everything else will be an x2. I think that'll look fine for what we want. So this will be a compound variant again. So we're going to say that if your size, it's kind of going to be the same thing. So we'll just pass that if it's that. And then the content though is icon, text, and icon. So if that's what the content is, then the class name should be that gap x 1.5. And then in the other case, it's going to be for these other sizes. It'll be a little bit bigger gap. I think it was gap 2 is what I'm going to go with. Okay, cool. Now we can see that's spaced out just a little bit nicer, which is good. So that's exactly what I wanted. Cool, so we got our icon buttons, or rather buttons with icons in them, but we also want our icon specific buttons. So we're gonna create a whole nother function or component for that, like I was saying earlier. We're gonna call it IconButton. And this will just make a lot of things easier. So the first thing we wanna do is we always wanna get our props. So we'll say IconButton props, and we'll declare that above. So it's basically gonna be button props, but I'm gonna get rid of things I don't want. So with this one, I don't want you to be able to pass in the rounded attribute because it should always be rounded. Like it's not rounded full, it's like rounded 100%. So I don't want that one passed. I also don't want a leading icon, and I don't want a trailing icon because it'd really just be one icon. Also, I don't want children. Cool, so now what can we pull out? We can pull out everything. We'll always take all the props and we're gonna spread those. So let's actually just copy what we have and we'll delete what we don't need. That is my preferred method of developing when I can. So all this stuff we don't want the children, we don't want any of that. We are going to want an icon though. So we're gonna add more props here, and we're gonna call the icon to be SVG component. It'll be the same thing. Oh, where'd that thing go? Did I not call it SVG component? I called it, yeah, SVG component. It just doesn't like that. Oh, it's because I used a star. That's not correct. Okay, ampersand. Oof, I'm all over the place. All right, here we go. All right, so let's render that here. So whatever icon we pass in, it'll be passed along. And then we need a few other things. So this is upset because it couldn't find it. I need to rename it to that capital icon. So that's a good example of why you need to rename it to the capitalized version. Otherwise, JSX won't know what to do. This content, I don't need all this logic because I just know it's going to be that type icon. So we add that insight to make it that third type in that first place of icon. So that's good. The rounded is going to be, I believe, full, which is fully rounded. I think I was saying earlier that I thought that was kind of different, but no, I'm pretty sure rounded full. If we go look really fast, what is rounded full? Yeah, it's like a border radius of, okay, 9,009. Yeah, a lot of pixels. So that is a full rounding. It doesn't look like a circle here because the content is too long for it to look like a circle, but in our case, it will. Okay, the size that will actually be passed in. So I do want to pull off the size, and then same with the intent. I'll do the order the same as I'd been doing it. So we get intent, we get size, that class name, I need to pull that off. So we got class name. Cool, now I think that fixes all our type issues. Let's go ahead and start rendering these so we can see what they look like. So up here, we will just kind of do all the same stuff that we've been doing above. But in this case, it won't be the normal button, it'll be the icon button. And of course, a few things will change here. Instead of it saying button text, we're going to have an icon. And here it will be a plus icon. We don't need that side, we can just close it. Cool, so we can see them all. Let's go ahead and see if there's any specific, okay, there are these height and width. So let's maybe add that first. And so we'll go up here and add that to our icon button and see if that helps resolve things. Perfect. So now we can see it. One thing I was noticing while I was looking there is we actually need this aria hidden to be true. And the reason we're doing that is because we don't want the screen reader to try and interpret or read what these icons are. We want screen readers for screen reader users just to completely skip the icon because it's not really useful information. It is useful information. Let me back that up a little bit. It is useful information to a visual sighted user. You know, when you see this plus, you're like, oh, okay, especially in the context of whatever it's in, you're going to understand that means like adding something or plus something. But we, you know, a non-sighted user doesn't really know what this SVG is, so we just want to skip SVGs altogether. So in the example where you had the trailing and the leading icon, you're going to want to make sure that your button is clear enough that it's describing what that is and that this is just like extra like niceties. So button text, not really describing what it is. You'd maybe say like confirm or something, I don't know, something that is clear just in the context of what's happening and with the text itself. So you're not relying on that icon. But in the case where you do have an icon button, you only have the icon itself. So you do have to supply something. In this case, we're going to add another property. We're going to call it hidden label. This will be required, and it's just a string. This is for screen readers specifically. So with this, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to use like an aria attribute. I'm just going to render a P with hidden label, and I didn't pull it off of the props, which is why it doesn't know what it is. So we'll say hidden label. So if I render that now, you can't actually see anything because I'm not passing it in. Should have TypeScript yelling at me. Yep, there it is. So in this case, we'll say hidden label is plus it. Now we can see plus it, but we don't want that. We don't want, like, the whole point of this is it's just a icon. And so here we're going to use a class name of SR only, and that is a Tailwind class where it says this is for screen readers only, so it makes it visually hidden, but screen readers would still read it, which is what we want. Cool, okay, we can see these aren't quite right. They're not like fully rounded, so there's definitely some issues going on. Scrolling down, we can see that the issue is, we get the rounded full, that's fine. It's actually the P, the padding should be consistent across all of it. Right now we're using the padding from everything above it, from all the other buttons, and so that's not quite right. So we want to add that, and this is going to be like another compound variant thing. Okay, so in our situation, let's pull up that code and see. So we need our compound variants. What we need to be able to say is we need to say the size when it is small, and when the content is text, it will be something like, let's start with the extra small, of course. And going all the way back down, I should have copied that. P1, this is kind of the small case. I'm going to make the extra small P05, and we'll just keep going up by 0.5 increments. So extra small and then text. And we'll say the class name is going to be P 0.5. So that'll be the extra small case, and we'll keep iterating further. So here we should have 1.5, this is 2.5, this one's 2. And of course this is small, medium, large, extra large. Before I go further though, we're gonna have some conflicts because I said the sizes, I set the P, X, and Y value and the sizes at first because I thought, you know, that's the only kind of variant we have, but now we have this compound way that size works with the content. So now I'm gonna pass those sizes into specific content. So the PX2 and the PY1, this one is for text extra small and text small, so I can remove it from both of these. And we already have that. We have extra small and small for the text and icon case, so it'll have that gap, and then it'll also have this P. And then we have the medium case, and we want this to be added. I'm actually realizing we have a bit of a mistake. We are only adding this if it's the text and icon, but we also need this to be just for text. So we'll create a whole nother one. Under here, we'll say the size, if the size is medium, and the content is text and content, and the class name is going to be what I just saved. That's unhappy because I messed up where this end of the array was. Okay, it's still upset because of course it's called text and icon. Perfect. This is upset further because I'm missing a comma. So that's for the size medium, and then the content being text or text and icon. And so in this case, I actually probably want to copy this one, and I'm gonna actually pull out the gap piece because that gap is very specific to text and icon, not all the other situations. So here we have this, and we're gonna pull off these and make it just px2 and py1. Okay, let's add the final two, large and extra large. So for large and then extra large, what are the paddings in those situations? So the first one we'll pull off is here. That's the large case. And then the extra large. Cool. So now we have all the different situations that we want, where it's just text and icon. We have all the padding correct, and now we have our padding for the icons definitely not correct. Something is wrong, and it's most likely because we just didn't pass in the size again. So looking up here, we can see we are actually passing the size, so probably did something else. And let's see. Yep, hopefully you caught this. This should not be text, it should be icon. So we can see, yep, that fixes it. So we'll get the remaining three, we'll change the icon, and now if we save, still not exactly, there we go. We just had a delay in the updating, and now you can see all these sizes are correct, which is awesome. And something I didn't even point out earlier is that basically the font color is already being used for the SVGs, which is nice, so we didn't have to do any extra coloring for that. So that's pretty cool. That's how you just like a lot more in depth of using these compound components and using the idea of maybe like a hidden variant to add kind of all this like extra bits of logic that we need for these more complex use cases. In the final video, we'll explore a little bit more of why CVA is so powerful and so much more powerful than kind of the method we had by changing the colors a little bit and creating a little bit of a different style to our buttons. So see you in the next video.